Hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me well. My name is Harald Egerer. I work for the United Nations Environment Program, Vienna office, Secretariat of the Carpathian Convention, and I send to all of you around the world, it seems, very nice greetings from a sunny but cold Vienna. We are sitting here in the Vienna International Center, one of the United Nations headquarters locations here on the spot. I'm very excited and very happy to open this briefing with the title, Bridging the Gender Gap in Rural Mountainous Regions, Challenges and Digitalization as One Opportunity, on the occasion of the Information Day under the Commission on the Status of Women at the CSW 67. I'm here with the organizers of this meeting. First of all, myself for United Nations Environment Program and the Carpathian Convention. Then the European Academy, Eurac Research, with Eleonora Musco, the NGO Committee on the Status of Women Vienna, Evelyn Dürrmeier, the NGO Committee on Sustainable Development Vienna with Mrs. Inge Geier, and the Alliance of NGOs on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice in the person of Anna Aijazi del Frate. Now, I would like to invite Evelyn Dürrmeier to please say a few words on behalf of the co-organizers.
Thank you for giving me the floor. Welcome to all of you, and thank you. We are really thrilled that we have the opportunity to work with UNEP, with Carpathian Convention, Eurac Research, and also with FAO to organize this Information Day. And as you know, it's centered firstly on the review theme of the CSW 67, which is our topic, the gender gap in rural mountain regions. But we also link it to the priority theme, that is digitalization. And this is also important because CSW will concentrate on Friday, the 10th of March, on this review theme, which was the priority theme during CSW 62 in 2018. And on this day of the 10th of March, there will be voluntary presentation on this review theme from various regions of the world, and they will hopefully come to an agreed conclusion, included in the agreed conclusion of this year. And I thank all of you, especially also the team here in Vienna, Eleonora, our focal point, and Harald as the boss of the UNEP Secretariat here, to be able to do this. And we are looking forward to have more of this project in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Evelyn, for your nice words. I want to recall that how all this came about. I remember that a few months ago you contacted us, and then you were telling me about your life and your functions as a lawyer and human rights and your strong engagement with the Commission on Women and with stakeholders and civil society. And we were discussing what could we maybe do together. And then you said that your subjects are the digitalization. And that's, of course, a topic for all of us in the United Nations that is very important for all of us in these times of big changes. And then you said you were also on the topic of rural issues and let's say rural maybe marginalization. And very quickly we were discussing about that this is very relevant for mountains. And we are strongly involved in the mountain agenda, and that's why we also brought on board the Mountain Partnership, which is hosted by the FAO as a quasi co-organizer now to this event. And then we said, okay, well, why does it matter for the environment? And in this respect, then we started to design this title and this topic for the intervention. And of course, for us in UNEP, we are the lead agency for environmental matters in the United Nations system. And as such, we have, of course, identified also gender equality and inequality. The inequality is the main challenge to advance the environmental dimension of sustainable development, because it prevents progress and it impacts negatively on our environments and on our right to a clean and safe and healthy environment for all. That's why it is important to have gender responsive approaches that make environmental interventions longer lasting and transformative. So that's really essential to achieve our goals and the environmental dimension of the Sustainable Development Goals. And to do so, the gender responsive approaches must also not only recognize the rights, which is should be self-understood, of girls and women and their interests and needs, but building on that, more importantly, to ensure the full participation in leadership, in decision-making, and in designing and developing and implementing all types of action. And I think here again, we are very strongly at the focus of this session, which is bridging the gender gap and bridging the, let's say, digital divide, and seeing digitalization as a bridge to achieve and filling this gap. Women and mountains, you will hear from this also more about it in this, of course, a lot about in this session. But mountain regions, in principle, are fragile regions. They are fragile in terms of ecological terms, but also for mountain populations living in these fragile environments. They are more vulnerable from economic and social point of view. And therefore, challenges like climate change from the environmental side, or a digital divide, or leaving some parts of the society behind digitally, would disproportionately affect the vulnerable parts of the population, or the more vulnerable, such as women, girls, by widening existing gender inequalities. Also, we want to say that and that cannot be repeated often enough, that women have a very strong knowledge of their local environments, but their voices are not always listened to or given adequate weight in the decision making. We, together with the Alpine Convention, which is, let's say, the sister convention of the Carpathian Convention, already quite a long time ago, in 2007, organized the conference in Alpbach, Austria, that was called The Role of Women in Mountain Regions, that was sponsored also by UNEP. This conference tries to take stock of global progress in women's rights that, according to these findings, took place at a slower pace, than average amongst the poor in remote areas, including mountain regions. And that meant that unequal rights mean women are more likely than men to face poverty, and they are also more vulnerable to suffer from negative effects of environmental disasters. At the same time, women are more likely than men in mountain regions to carry out agricultural activities. More than 50% of women do so, while also tending to work longer and with less pay than men. As a result, women play a stronger role in the management of key natural resources linked to biodiversity, food, and water security. The Alpbach conference at this time called to help to ensure that women can enjoy better quality work, family time, and other activities without them compromising each other. And it was asking for a platform to exchange information and experiences on the role of mountain women. We have been doing something in UNEP and also as a Secretariat of Carpathian Convention to work to highlight women's roles in mountain areas. We did so during international events. We did some research projects together, for example, with the Regional Academy of the United Nations, RAUN. But of course, I believe we have not done enough, and much more needs to be done. And that's why we now picked up this opportunity to have another platform of exchange at the offer of our co-organizers. And thank you very much for that. So today's meeting should also be an example of UNEP and our partners, such as the FAO and others, and the Eurac, to discuss the good practices and drive the achievement of gender equality goals in these activities on mountains. More concretely now, this meeting aims to increase awareness among stakeholders of the interconnections between gender, environmental issues, and digital divide in mountain areas, to promote the dialogue among experts, policymakers, and other stakeholders on gender, environment, and digital divide, but in systemic thinking to really encourage to look at solutions and promote solution-oriented thinking to overcome such remaining challenges. For this, to share good practices and lessons learned also among the different mountain regions of this world that are all around the world, beautiful regions, far away from each other, but with similar challenges. And last but not least, to collect key messages for future activities and initiatives. So that was my part of the introduction, and now we come to the real speakers. And I will go one by one, and so I will introduce one speaker after the other. And we will start with our first speaker. And I'm very pleased to invite Mrs. Sara Manuelli, who is the Advocacy and Outreach Officer of the Mountain Partnership Secretariat, which is the secretariat of a very important international partnership for mountains, hosted by the FAO in Rome, with the title Mountain Women of the World, Stories of Resilience and of Collective Power. So Sara, we are in your hands and we are listening to your speech.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Harald. Thank you all. Good morning, good afternoon for this invitation and for a chance also to celebrate International Women's Day a day earlier. So my presentation wants to outline a few of the key messages that Harald has already mentioned, and a few activities that the Mountain Partnership Secretariat, also the FAO, is doing, striving towards gender equality. So I'm going to share my screen. If someone could allow me to share. There you go. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Yes. Can you see it normally, just with the front?
We see
the next slide.
Yeah.
Let me just see. Just a second. I don't know why this is coming up. Sorry. I don't know display setting. This doesn't. Anyway, I'll go with this, and hopefully won't distract you too much. So yes, Mountain Women of the World. My name is Sara Manuelli. As Harald introduced me, I'm the Outreach and Communication Officer of the Mountain Partnership Secretariat. Just a few words of the Mountain Partnership. It's the only UN alliance, voluntary alliance, that comprises a really amazing multi-stakeholder set of members. So we have over 450 members around the world, including governments, IGOs, NGOs, and private sectors, all working towards the improvement of mountain livelihoods and the protection of mountain ecosystems. A few key messages Harald already mentioned. We don't have a lot of disaggregated data in mountains, unfortunately, and that is obviously an issue that we might want to touch upon. But we do know that around even more than 50% of women in mountainous regions perform agricultural activities. And they are really the keepers and the holders of traditional indigenous knowledge. And that means that they are also a key actor in contributing to climate change adaptations. They're also vital to biodiversity conservation because a lot of their activity is also rooted in agricultural activities, and of course also water and food securities as head of households. They face many challenges, like in many poor regions in the world, but even more in mountains. We know that there are some very high rates of poverty, hence a lot of men migrate abroad or seasonally or for longer periods in search of better incomes. And while this contributes to some form of remittance society, it is true that mountain women are often left behind, having to deal with the farms, managing the households, leading the communities, but often without an official acceptance or role, because they are often limited from owning land. The fact that they have to manage the farms and also manage the families and the households means that they suffer from excessive workloads, and they have inadequate access to resources and services like training and infrastructures. We also know that some of the few data that we have shows that also mountain women and girls do suffer, are more prone to vulnerability to food insecurity due to discriminatory sociocultural gender norms and stereotypes. The FAO, you might not know, is it's a UN agency which is mandated to lead the observance of International Mountain Day. That happens every year on the 11th of December. This year, the theme was chosen was Women in Mountains, and we called it Women Move Mountains. And it was really a chance to celebrate the crucial role they hold in mountain societies. It's a day which is celebrated not only here at FAO headquarters, but also elsewhere all around the world. So we had about 90 events in 46 countries, largely connected to the theme. So that we had anything from poetry competitions to tree planting to seminars and conferences. And the Mountain Partnership Secretariat, together with a member called the Feminist Hiking Collective, published a study on mountain women. And I just wanted to have talk to you through this publication, which was a study which was conducted during COVID, so the past 2 years. And it's based on a series of in-depth interviews with 313 women. 8 countries were selected. We had Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, Italy, Kenya, Kyrgyzstan, Nepal, and Tanzania. And all the mountain women interviewed are all active in some form of work, whether it's farming or crafts or working in tourism industry. Some of the findings, and then of course I can send you the link to the study if you want to read it, is that, as Harald already mentioned, also women's voices are often unheard. They are there, and their work is socially, politically, and economically quite invisible in many countries. Obviously, how to go about and what will be the next steps would be a long list of to-dos, but some of those that came out from the women that were interviewed there was really obviously funding and a series of policies, but also the granting of rights to resources and to services and the equal conditions as men. For example, a lot of women don't have access to credit, a lot of women don't have access to inheritance, and those are real hindrances in terms of empowerment and economic empowerment. And of course, again, training and priority access to financial services. A little bit looking at the digital divide was mentioned in the study because, for example, during COVID-19, the internet allowed these communities to organize themselves transnationally, what they call networks of solidarity. And of course, we know that access to technology, to science and innovation are really pathways for the economic empowerment of women. This is just a little snapshot of one of the women of the younger generation, Karin Martinez, who lives in the high Andes. She comes from a family of herders. They own llamas, sheep, and goats. And even though she's a herder by trade, Karin wants to study, and she has no internet connection. And this is just her quote here: "It's been difficult to study as we don't have internet. However, I don't want to leave here." It's the story of many women who do not want to leave their land, who want to continue to be the stewards of their land and maintain the resources and continue their traditions, but do need further education and do need access to opportunities. One project that I wanted to talk about is something that we're working here at the Mountain Partnership Secretariat. I think it's a very exciting project, and in some ways has links to the whole issue of technology, because e-commerce becomes a driving factor here. We launched it on the International Mountain Day last year. It's called Fashion for Fragile Ecosystems. And it's really looking at training from fashion designers, in this case from Italy, where we have an immense know-how of Italian fashion, to communities of artisans in mountains to look at how to strengthen their value chain and produce new products that have which have an appeal to the markets. We know that the fashion market, there is an audience for ethical, sustainable fashion, and we also know that women in mountains, we always say how limited they are in their empowerment, but we need to remember that women are rich. They're rich in knowledge, they're rich in customs, they're rich in culture, they're rich in resilience. And this richness comes, for example, through their crafts, through traditional techniques. And so we initiated 2 pilot projects, one in Kyrgyzstan and one in Peru. I've put the links of the videos here. Perhaps I can send them to you later. You may want to watch them. And it had an enormous press outreach, because somehow it really captures the attention of even the different, not the traditional mountain stakeholder audience. We had articles in Vogue, in La Repubblica, El País, and FAO editorials. In the case of Peru, which was the last case study which we worked on, we have a fashion designer and a mountain partnership goodwill ambassador. She's called Stella Jean. She's actually Italo-Haitian, and she developed a collection with a community of alpaqueras and artisans that live in the high Andes. They're called Ilari Threads for Dreams. And these women, they're a community of about 34 alpaqueras. They live in Tolconi, which is a village high up in the Andes. We're talking about 4,800 meters. So you can imagine that the internet connection is quite sparse. In fact, the women often go 1,000 meters down to the next village to be able to do some training with internet. So Stella went there to do some trainings with them. And the peculiarity of this community is that they, even though the market prefers white fiber of alpacas, they work with colored alpaca, which means really all those gradations of brown, gray, and black of alpacas. And with that, they created these items that they will be selling on their website. Through Stella's intervention, she did two things. First, she developed together a capsule collection that then was launched at an FAO event and also at Milan just a few weeks ago, which she then sells to international buyers. And then what she does, she also did that with the Kyrgyzstan case, she grants them the IP, the intellectual property. So these communities can then readapt those models. Obviously, they won't be the same of what she's selling at Saks, but they will be a different type of models, and then they will sell them on their website, therefore gaining a wider access and a wider market. And of course, they benefit from the outreach and the media spotlight that we provide to them. So this is just one of the case studies that we're doing. I think, one of the recommendations are, as I said, we would have a long list of recommendations here, and it's a little bit difficult to pin down, but I think we need to recognize that mountain women can play a key role in becoming facilitators and climate advocates. We need to look at policies and innovation and access to science and technology. We need to look at niches like high-value mountain products that really can help mountain producers in also fetch higher prices, because that means through an e-commerce site, for example, they don't have to go physically to the market, and they can ask for something more because there is a market that will be willing to pay that extra pound, that extra euro more. Sustainable tourism is also a very it can be a very profitable income for women. So also the training of mountain guides, which is the Feminist Hiking Association does. Social protection, that's also, I think, an issue of human rights, really. And really inform evidence-based policy making. What I was mentioning before, the fact that there is a lack of disaggregated data on gender in mountains is obviously an issue, because that means that we cannot really pinpoint to specific interventions with stats. And that is something that we need to certainly improve upon. So that's it for me. I hope you are interested in hearing a bit more about the activities that we do. Feel free to contact me on my email address, and feel free to ask any further questions you might have. Thank you. Over.
Thank you very much, Sara, for your really excellent presentation at the beginning. It was really the good choice to have you as the, let's say, umbrella speaker here. In case there are questions, please, we have such a packed program. I encourage you to put them into the chat, and when there is time at the end of this meeting, of this event, we can try to go into the chat and answer them, or you can already answer them yourself if you're the speaker. I take away from you that you talked about, in fact, the lack of disaggregated data, but at the same moment, you brought your mountain women interviews, where you interviewed more than 300 women, and I believe with a lot of qualitative data, which I found really very interesting. And then you also showed very beautiful approach of solutions. And I think that these, let's say, intrinsic recommendations were as strong as the explicit ones. So thank you very much. And please stay with us for the round table, because we still have a question to you later on. With this, we want to move on to our second speaker. And it's my big pleasure to invite Mrs. Magdalena Kubal-Czerwińska, assistant professor from Jagiellonian University in Kraków in Poland, which is for me also very nice to have you, because you might know that Poland is currently playing a very important role in the Carpathian Convention. You are the so-called presidency. And also we will come to Kraków to a big symposium later this year. And you are going to speak about gender perspective on the professional activity of women in tourism in the Carpathians. So we are listening to you very curiously.
Yes, thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you very much to having me today. And I would start with my presentation also mentioning that, yes, I am aware about the great meeting that is coming this year because I'm an organizer. So I hope we're going to meet here in person, but not to prolong that introduction. I will try to share my screen with you and yes, sorry. Try to have the presentation, but maybe starting from the beginning. Hope you're seeing the screen. If you could just confirm, I would be very glad. Thank you. Thank you. As I will thank you for the introduction as well. I would like to talk very briefly about the particular case study, which comes for the Polish part of the Carpathians, and I would like to share with you the results of the research that fit into a very broadly understood concept of the gender gap in the rural mountains areas, mountain regions. The women professional activity in mountain regions, especially rural areas, causes broad and profound changes in many spheres of social economic life of women of those areas, as well as their families. And this is the topic that I would like to broader discuss. I would like to discuss the gender perspective on the professional activity of women in tourism in the Polish Carpathians on an example of especially agrotourism farms. And that study is a first study that was devoted to women working in agrotourism in the Polish context after the political transformation that took place in the 90s of the 20th century. So I would like to briefly set a background why this topic for Poland, for Polish Carpathians, it's important. Women in rural areas have a very limited access to the labor market in the agricultural and also non-agricultural sector. There are many obstacles for that. Transportation difficulties, limited access to social infrastructure, to kindergartens, to schools, and barriers to access to education. In Polish statistics, since 25 years already, we see that among the statistics about unemployment, women play the major part. So there is a concept of feminization of unemployment in rural areas in Poland. The main problems that prevent the full participation of women in labor market are insufficient number of jobs for people not connected with farms, with farming, exposure previously hidden, unemployment in agriculture, especially in those after those transitions in the 90s of the 20th century, and continued lack of alternative employment for women in areas of former state farms who wanted to develop in a different direction than farming. Political transformation that I was mentioning already in the late 80s and the beginning of the 90s of the 20th century, from a centrally planned economy to market economy, caused the transition on the income of situation among the farmers in Poland. It was visible in the decline of the significance of agriculture in the whole rural economy of the Carpathians, as well as in local communities and rural culture. There was a shift to multifunctional rural development, which was observed also in many regions of the Carpathians, in line with the long traditions of tourism and hospitality in the Polish part of the Carpathians, and with the search for a new source of extra income on the farm, agrotourism was perceived as the very profitable and promising opportunity for women's, for female professional activation. There are still insufficient job opportunities for women in rural areas. Mostly it is those jobs are devoted to small-scale manufacturing, small-scale food businesses, administration services, education, social welfare, medical nursing services. But among those elements, among those jobs, agrotourism, private accommodations, apartments and tourist services are seen as the way where women are more open to start their own business than in other sectors. From the broad literature, we can identify several motives of women activity in agritourism farms. It is connected with improvement of economic situation of their farms, production capabilities, social and living conditions. Women want to improve an infrastructure in the farm, as also gain skills through participate in very different forms of support, like trainings and consultations. They want to also demonstrate their usefulness, and they are seeking to recognition among the community. They want, they are willing to sacrifice for the family. They want to work hard. They want to show their respect to work. And what is also important, they are striving to meet aspirations in life. They want to feel the sense of stability. They want to feel secure. They want to have a security which is not only connected with the financial income, so with the financial sphere. They want to be to use their skills to be a family and generational, to be a factor for family and generational promotion. So with this context, we designed a research that was organized among women who are running or co-running an agrotourism farm in the part of Carpathian region in the Małopolska Voivodeship, so that mountainous area of the Małopolska Voivodeship. We interviewed 70 women running or co-running an agrotourism farm, and that was the base for this discussion on female professional activity in agrotourism. This case study is a great example for a discussion on gender perspective on the professional activity of women in tourism due to several reasons. First, long tourism traditions dated back to the 17th century. In this region, nearly 75% of identified agrotourism farms with a still running farm are run or co-run by women. Those agrotourism farms are formed by multi-generational families where even 3 generations living under one roof. Some of those agrotourism farms operating more than 30 years, and these communities, which the agrotourism farms were located, are still very close communities, where all changes, social changes, are still very visible, and we can identify them. Revenues from agrotourism for the most of surveyed households did not constitute the main source of income per year. So the main source of income was mostly the salaries of their members from permanent employment or social benefits. During the tourist season, especially summer, incomes from tourism activity constituted the main additional source of income that could allocate all the current expenses of the household. There were also identified farms for which the income from the tourism activity covers all activity during the year, but these were just only few examples. We can identify three groups of motives which guided women while choosing their path of profession activity in agrotourism. Those were identified, except economic benefits, right? Factors arising from the environment of farms, such as long hospitality traditions, the level of tourism development of the region, the presence of attractive assets for tourism. Those women were very aware where they are living, around what environment, in which environment, what state of that environment is, and how it attracts tourists. The second group of factors are internal factors associated with household and agricultural resources. Equally important for that were a group of motives that I called individualistics of psychological and social nature. The need to contact with people, with other people, the creation of a workplace for herself or the children, the need to get a sense of independence, which is not only connected with income, the need of self-realization and the feeling of being needed in the family. So the female professional activity in agrotourism has not only an economic, but also social and a cultural dimension. A significant problem from the point of view of professional activity of women and their perception of their own activity in rural farm is the question in how in this context the owners perceived their profession. What is their profession? Can work at home be or within the agrotourism activity be considered as a profession, or it is just kind of like spreading the responsibilities from the household to tourists, right? It can be seen this way. As we can see on that slide, 20% of respondents declared work on the farm as their professional activity, as their job. Only 6% declared that only work at home and fulfilling the duties of from the household is their profession. But in total, 65% of women declared that agrotourism is their profession, like paid job, in addition with other activities on the farm or in the household. Respondents were also asked for their opinion, what they can describe as their success in life. Polish women who work in agrotourism, they see well-being of their children in general, their success as their success in life. They are treating family and their happiness as at first. Their loved ones are extremely important. And mostly women declare that children, happiness and prosperity in life is their success in life. And this is very characteristic for traditional multi-generational families, where family values passed from generation to generation create family traditions and that strength in the family. Additionally, the concept of life success also includes agrotourism activities, but out of all opinions that I gathered, that running agrotourism business as a success is perceived not in related to financial benefits obtained from that activity, but through the social prism, understood as a satisfaction and appreciation of customers. So another dimension. Gestors women were also asked for their opinion of the role they are playing in the household. There were proposed 6 categories, but women are often defined their roles of wife and mother as the primary ones. So women are first moms and wives. This is their main role that they are playing in the families. Those roles are treated by the gestors as a natural phenomenon. On the second position, the roles related to duties performed in relation to the farm and agrotourism farm were mentioned. Just summing up it very briefly, running an agrotourism farm allows women to combine and perform 3 roles in one time: a housekeeper in household, a farmer, and a manager of agrotourism farm. It can be presumed that tourism, agriculture, and household are a natural symbiosis in which agrotourism is actually the factor for change in that environment that women are living. Considering the increase of duties related to tourism services, that position of women in the family increases and strengthens. One of the key questions about success in life is also the development of characteristics of features and competences which developed during professional activity in tourism. And women were asked several questions. What kind of features, what kind of characteristics, what kind of personal competences developed during running an agrotourism farm, sometimes over 30 years. So women are very aware that success in their work depends primarily on themselves. So in addition to the individual personality characteristics, the success in life, in their agrotourism activity, is the outcome of the managerial skills, such as ability to organize work, coordinate duties, ability to act independently, making decisions, knowledge, and involvement in running their own business. These competences are acquired by the owners individually in practice. And this is how they are creating their agrotourism product based on their social capital. What I would like to underline that agrotourism farms offer a special type of hospitality, which is not very recognized among hospitality sector, because we have different type of services. But we have to underline that element of particular hospitality that comes from the culture, that comes from the internal factors, that comes from the tradition. And in many regions of Carpathians, that hospitality is very visible. When we talk about the professional activity, we also talk about involvement in the society, in the community, the role in the community. And in line with increase of the professional activity of women, their interest in community affairs and community stuff increases as well. It is still determined by the individual factors as women's personality, interpersonal skills, social competences. There is different types of work. This is counseling, consultation, representing the community of agrotourism owners in relation to local authorities, but also singing in the local choir. We can see also the opinions of those who are involved in community affairs, and also those opinions that are of women who did not decide or did not prolong their activity in the field of community affairs. This slide, with this slide, I would like to underline or summarize that statement that I made in the title of the presentation. To sum up that consideration, gender perspective on the professional activity of women in tourism in the Carpathians has 5 dimensions. This activity influences in one time the sphere of the family, the farm, the household itself, personal development of women, as well as relations and position within the community. This shows how deep the professional activity in the tourism sector goes and influences within those spheres of women's daily life. That influence is direct and indirect. What is more interesting, we can see that the influence of female professional activity changes relations within the family and relations with particular family members, like children or husband. Disjoint and seemingly mutual exclusive spheres of duties are somehow undertaken by women with full awareness and understanding, which means that the different social roles performed by women do not lead to conflict situations and internal tensions in the family. Acceptance of the necessity to reconcile duty is closely related to the traditional perception of the way of life in the countryside that is very visible in the Polish culture, among the community of the Carpathian region, where own duties should be performed, not assigned to other family member, and given time and cope with them. These are very broad, very little insights from that research in the Carpathians, from the Carpathian research, that I would like to underline. Professional activity of women in agrotourism activities has a social and cultural dimension apart from the economical one. It does not lead to creation of new jobs, but to multiplication and intensification of the obligations of household members. It influences the change of roles of women and men in marriage and the family, and that success of the agrotourism activity depends on attitudes, competence, and personality of the woman, and ability to reconcile that the new function of the farm with the agricultural background can be transformed or can be extended for the new activity, new dimension, which is agrotourism, treated as a professional job. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share with you with that case study, and I'm willing to answer any questions now or later in the discussion part. Thank you very much.
Thank you indeed, Magdalena, for these insights and local perspectives from the Carpathian region. That is really highly appreciated. And just to say that everybody is invited to come to Kraków from 25 to 29 September this year for the Forum Carpathicum, which is a big scientific congress for Carpathian environmental and social affairs. There's a special segment also on education for sustainable development, which is, I believe, also a very related topic. And maybe you can use your presence in Kraków then to go to the rural areas in Poland and do some agrotourism and enjoy the hospitality there and contribute to the local development and also the personal development of the people involved. And please stay with us, Magdalena, for the round table, and let's move on for our next speaker. And it's my honor and pleasure to introduce Mrs. Theresia Oedl-Wieser, Head of Department of the Austrian Federal Institute of Agricultural Economics, Rural and Mountain Research, with a presentation and then a video on women's empowerment in the high mountain region of Mestia, Georgia, outcomes of community-led local development initiatives. So, Mrs. Oedl-Wieser, please.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Could you please share my presentation? Thank you. Yes. Thank you very much for the invitation to share our experiences we made in Mestia, Georgia, with you. And the next slide, please. I want to report about the project implementing LEADER in Mestia municipality for better livelihoods in high mountain regions of Georgia. This project was financed by the NPART program of the European Union and also from the Austrian Development Cooperation, and was implemented by CARE and another organization. And my institute was assisting during the elaboration of the local development strategy of Mestia municipality, and we organized also a thematic workshop on regional branding, and we organized the study tour to Carinthia in Austria in June last year. The LEADER approach is a community led local development approach, which wants to also invite many people from the region to work on a development strategy. And it is also an area-based approach, which tries to that the local and regional resources become aware under the participating people, and that they are find ways to network and cooperate in their region. So the project we were part of had the overall objective to improve livelihoods of vulnerable households in this remote high mountainous region of Georgia and to support their economic and social well-being. And the specific objective was especially to improve the diversification and competitiveness of the rural economy and the inclusion of vulnerable groups. There are many there, also internally displaced persons or young people and women who cannot find employment. Also the social infrastructure is not well developed. So, this objective was also to strengthen the sustainable management of natural resources in Mestia municipalities by implementing the leader approach. We can see after finalizing the project that the objective to involve or include women was very successful. We can say that more than 50% of participants during the elaboration of the local action group and the definition of the local development strategy were women. And now also more than half of the LAC members of the board of the LAC are female, and also there are also representatives in this board of internally displaced persons, youth, social vulnerable groups, and disabled people. And also the current president of the LAC is a woman. And we can also say that nearly half of the 75 local initiatives which were funded by the project were women-led. And these projects were selected by CARE and the local action group Upper Svaneti. The next slide, please. I want only very briefly describe that Georgia has been a priority country of the Austrian development cooperation since 2011. And in Mestia municipality, there is also another project implemented together with Swedish partners and the European NPART project. It is called Greater Green Economy, Sustainable Mountain Tourism and Organic Agriculture. So there are also many linkages to this project. And now I want to introduce a project which was funded by the project. It is the Café Mariami. Please start the
2018 წლიდან გვაქვს პატარა საოჯახო სასტუმრო და გვაქვს აგრეთვე კაფე. ღია კაფე. ევროკავშირმა დაგვაფინანსა. სამზარეულო მოგვიწყო თავისი დანადგარებით, თავისი მაცივრებით, ну ყველაფრიანად, აი რაც საჭიროა სამზარეულოში, ყველაფრით დაგვეხმარა. Mariami არის ევროკავშირის ბენეფიციარი. Mariam's აქვს ხანდა ყოლილი სმენის პრობლემა, სმენა დაქვეითებულია და ჩატარებული აქვს ოპერაცია კუხლიაურული იმპლანტით და 16 წლის ასაკში ჩაუტარდა ოპერაცია. სანამ სკოლაში მივიდოდა, მანამდე ვცდილობდი ყველანაირად, რომ აი ეს ანბანი მესწავლებინა და ვასწავლე კიდევაც მივაღწია ამას. აი ტუჩების მოძრაობით, მაშინ საერთოდ არ ესმოდა. და ამ ოპერაციის შედეგად არის შედეგი, რა თქმა უნდა, მაგრამ არ ესმის იმ სასმენი აპარატის გარეშე. და ეს სასმენი აპარატი საქართველოში ძალიან ძვირად ღირებულია, 9,000 ევრო ჯდება. ესეთ ადამიანებისთვის, აი როგორი პრობლემური ჩვენც ვართ და აი ესეთი ჩვენთვის ძალიან დიდი დახმარება იყო ეს და ძალიან დიდი მნიშვნელობა აქვს მაგას. ნუ ეხლა მე ერთი თვეა რაც გაიხსნა ჩვენი კაფე და სადღაც ერთი 50-მდე ტურისტი მიღებული მყავს და გასტუმრებული. და მომხმარებელს ყველანაირ აი პირველ რიგში სვანურ ტრადიციულ კერძებით უმასპინძლდები სტუმარს. ყველაზე მეტი მოთხოვნა არის ჩვენ სვანურ კერძებს. მე მინდა დიდი მადლობა გადაუხადო ამ მხარდაჭერისთვის ევროკავშირს და ყველა იმ ორგანიზაციას, რომელმაც ეს პროექტი განახორციელა ჩვენს მუნიციპალიტეტში.
Thank you very much for sharing the video, and thanks a lot also to Morgan Siegel from CARE, which organized the video and that I can show it to you and share it with you. So here you can see that this project supported a young disabled young woman who together with her mother is now has started a cafe for tourists, and hopefully they are successful also in the future. The start was very hopeful. So the slide before, please. Yes, as I mentioned already, out of the 75 projects, nearly half are women-led projects, and here are some more activities which were implemented in Mestia municipality with the support of the project. We have here a social enterprise which was initiated by a school teacher, which initiated a space for empowering rural women. She organized 7 sewing machines and some equipment, also a car and equipment to make or produce Venetian soap and sewing materials. And now 15 women are employed in these initiatives. The second one is a startup of a young female geographer. She is the founder of a map enterprise, cartography in Mestia. Before she started her project, there was no comprehensive database available of information for tourists, and she tried to integrate all this relevant information into such maps for tourists. And the third project is from a female dentist in Mestia. which could modernize and fully equip her clinic. And now the whole year people can come to her clinic for treatment. And she's also qualifying people in this medical or local medical staff, so that there is an advantage in the dental provision or the yes, she increases the capacity of local medical staff. So the next slide, please. Here I want to introduce another project where the local action group Apasvaniti and CARE are involved, which was funded from the Avast Foundation. It is called Empowering Youth Civic Activism and Digital Literacy in Mestia Municipality. And within this project, young people from the region get digital education and develop their skills. And it should also lead to youth activism initiatives and digital campaigns. And until now, there have been implemented 5 activities. They are rather on their starting point, but they have already taken some activities. There is the Screen Print Svaneti. It's a printer space and a service hub, which I think is very important for young people in the region. Then Discover Svaneti is also a tourism-led initiative where young people are searching for information about the region, and the other activities are bringing together people who are searching jobs, young people, and businesses. Then there is another activity which wants to organize transport within the region, but also to outside Mestia municipalities. And Ecosvaneti is an initiative of young people who want to work in the environmental issue. The next slide, please. As I have already mentioned, one of our tasks in the project was to organize the study trip to Austria. It was a once week study trip, and it was intended that the visitors from Mestia municipalities from the Lac Apasvaneti can see how a remote area in Austria is developing in an environmental friendly way since the last 30 years. It is a very high mountainous area. It is on the border to Italy and is following one very important point is that people working in the region and people who are developing the region want or focus on a strategy of balanced territorial development. So they are seeking for harmony of human-nature interrelations. our intention when we were organizing this exchange was also to share the experiences of obstacles and pathways by a remote region which restricts itself in tourism growth, because we have many examples in other Austrian regions which have this tourism concepts with growing. So we thought that it is very interesting for the colleagues from Georgia how to see how a region is dealing with such a restricted growth concept. The next slide, please. Yes, we got also feedback from the participants, and one or the most important feedback was that they realized that it is important to balance this activity between human action and the nature or the resources the region has. So maybe they got some impression how it can look to develop their region in a environmental friendly or green tourism conceptual way. So we tried our best to show some examples. What we think was also a very important point is that they saw that these activities they could see in the region need also or are based on long-term social cultural processes, so that it needs time to get an idea, to implement the intended projects, and that therefore there is also a demand of a deep awareness of place-specific conditions and to establish new development approaches. And it is also core that when you are limiting your development, you have to stress other factors like pride and consciousness of quality of production and services. So we showed them a lot of examples of organic farms, of agrotourism, of farms who are producing cheese or other products from their own goods. So we showed them a wide scope of diversification activities of farm households, which indicate a significant potential, but also an innovative potential. And also we could show them examples that young people were coming back to the region, starting their own businesses in tourism or in farming, and which were very innovative and also connected to urban regions, so that there is another spirit then within their businesses. The Lesachtal is also a climate and energy model region, so there is not only tourism and agriculture, but they also try to look at autonomous strategies for energy in their region. So what was a very big surprise was that the participants from the LAC Upper Svanetsi were to a large extent young people who were attending this study tour, and hopefully they could find some ideas and got good impressions also to implement their own ideas in their region afterwards. And the last slide, please. Yes, this was the group visiting Carinthia last June. And I want to thank also Morgan Siegel from CARE and Thomas Dax from BAP, which were supporting me in preparing this presentation. Thank you very much.
Lisa, I believe you are in Turkey and you did it all from Turkey. Now your presentation was from Austria. Thank you very much. It was really impressive. I don't want to comment not too much because the time is pressing, but it was impressive to listen to your experiences on the importance of the local action groups with women. You talked about women with disabilities that had new opportunities and many other things. I just wanted to also let you know that we are involved in a scientific network for the Caucasus. It would be very interesting for us now as UNEP to learn more from you, to speak more, in particular also about your experiences on transnational exchange that you brought at the end, self-restriction on tourism growth, balances, natural processes, all these kind of things I think are very relevant as good examples also for other mountain regions. So thanks a lot for your presentation.
Thank you very much.
And we are, please stay on board for the, of course, for the roundtable at the end. Now I would like to switch to the next speaker, which is Mr. Omer Aijazi. He's chair of IUCN Mountain Ecosystems Group, and he's talking to us about the power of stories, women and world making in the Himalayas of Pakistan and Kashmir. So Omar, the floor is yours. Please just stick to the 10 minutes because the clock is ticking, but the floor is all yours. Really.
Okay, great. I'm just gonna pull up my slides. So hi everyone, I'm very glad to be here and listen to these amazing presentations so far. And I'm going to take you to a very different part of the world, to the Himalayas in Kashmir in northern Pakistan. As already introduced, I'm Omer Aijazi. I'm the chair of the IUCN Mountain Ecosystems Group. I'm also a researcher based at the University of Victoria in Canada. I'm an ethnographer and a storyteller. And today I'm going to speak to you from both these locations. So the Mountains Group at IUCN is a volunteer network with members spread all over the world. And our aim is to advise the IUCN, which is a large science-based conservation agency, and other environmental policymakers on the following question: that how can we make environmental action in mountain regions alive to the needs and contributions of women, Indigenous, Black, Brown, queer, and gendered peoples, who in most cases are at the forefront of nature conservation, but oftentimes get dismissed or overlooked by various processes of scientific knowledge construction and top-down policymaking. So keeping this mission in mind, for the last 8 years or so, I've been conducting research with women and vulnerable communities in the rural Himalayan mountainscapes of Kashmir and its continuity with northern Pakistan. This is a remote and isolated region, disconnected from the rest of the country, faced with rapid environmental change and ecological decline, and also political conflict. And all of this is in addition to overarching, cultural forms and social codes that impede the flourishing of women and girls. Kashmir, as some of you may know, is a disputed territory. It is highly militarized. It's the site of contention between two neighboring countries, that is of Pakistan and India. So this is a restricted and militarized zone, and access remains a major issue for environmental organizations. And women and girls here face a range of challenges. But in my work, I'm less interested in listing these challenges because I think there's enough literature and evidence out there on this stuff already. But I'm more interested in the world that takes root during violence, and I characterize environmental decline and climate change as forms of violence. And I'll return to this idea shortly. But what I'm interested in is how do women and girls sustain and extend themselves, or how do they survive and flourish, amid overwhelming constraint? So this is a strength-based approach, one that values lived experience and story over anything else. And this way of doing research, over the years has allowed me to glean a different set of insights and make different connections with lived reality and policy. And some of these insights I'm going to briefly share today. So the first insight I have to offer is to consider climate change and environmental decline as cascading forms of violence which unfold in the everyday. And by this I mean that it's difficult to separate environmental decline from the everyday because environmental change manifests in the minutest details of the daily. For example, in the form of, let's say, crop failure, which leads to hunger at home, in the form of decreased paid agricultural work, which means lesser household incomes, which translates into things like the deprioritization of education for girls, early marriages, increasing household debt, which we know is linked with intergenerational slavery and sexual violence against women and girls, or just out-migration to cities in an overall context of urbanization and lack of adequate and safe urban housing, again, putting gendered bodies at the most risk. So I find it challenging to think about climate change adaptation, or let's say disaster risk reduction, for example, without placing these day-to-day impediments at the core of strategy. For example, enhancing and protecting educational opportunities for girls in ecologically fragile mountainscapes should be a central component of, let's say, climate change adaptation. And then there's immense value in ensuring the scope of climate actions integrates strategies that explicitly address outstanding development challenges and power inequities. The most common way gender is operationalized within environmental action is through the language of inclusion and participation. And I think it's important to think further about what we mean by gender inclusion. So the second insight I have to share is that we need to differentiate between the instrumental value of gender inclusion versus its intrinsic value in environmental action. By this, I mean whether gender is just a means to enhance the effectiveness of environmental action, so the instrumental value, or whether gender equity is pursued for its own sake for much more deeper and transformative changes, which will have a range of multiplier effects, including enhanced environmental outcomes. And the choice of this deeply affects how environmental action and policy engages with women and girls. There's plenty of evidence that only approaching gender in instrumental terms can actually lead to adverse outcomes, such as increasing women's labor or backlash from powerful stakeholders, for example, when broader powerful differentials are not challenged. As opposed to thinking about gender as social and cultural constructions of roles and responsibilities, which when are not egalitarian, can be contested and changed, redefined, carefully, of course. So, for example, some resource use policies, I won't name initiatives, in an effort to be gender forward, privileged the traditional nuclear family, which had the unintended consequence of only allowing women access to natural resources if they were part of a nuclear family, as a wife or a mother, and so on. And those who weren't were then denied any rights of usage. So when you think of gender inclusion in environmental action, I think we can go much further if we focus on its intrinsic value, which then allows us to think more seriously about things like rights and justice, the resource and capabilities, which can further enhance the lives of women and girls in more robust ways. One of my colleagues who's an ecologist, he says that there's no place for politics within nature conservation. And in my opinion, that couldn't be further from the truth, because environmental action always unfolds within a broader political landscape, and the choice of claiming neutrality is in itself a political choice. So the next, insight I have to offer is that we need to consider, processes of decolonization again as a key component of environmental action. Typically, environmental interventions are not prioritized in conflict zones for reasons of safety, access, longevity of response, and so on. Yet these are sites where needs are the highest, and women and girls are the most disempowered, because we also know, much like climate change, conflict also disproportionately and differently impacts women and girls. So in this context, decolonization in the case of Kashmir means demilitarization and creating local opportunities where people can debate and put forward their own visions of sovereignty, for example. And I think all of this must also be at the heart of climate action. And what I've noticed in my work, both as a practitioner and a researcher, is that there's a lot of emphasis, almost an obsession, on creating new spaces of listening. So we have, local women committees, we have consultations with women, we have women-only focus group discussions, and so forth. And all of that is great, usually, but oftentimes it also creates even more burden for women who are already, the busiest and the most overworked members of the household and even of the community. So my next, insight or recommendation is that instead of focusing so much on creating, more spaces of listening, what if we also focus on what's already present? So, for example, in my research, most of my dialogue, with women takes place in the kitchen, as women are embedded within the daily tasks of cooking and cleaning, or in landscape, while foraging for food. The consultations with women can take the form of participating in everyday labor, for example. And then the kitchen becomes the site of consultation and deep listening, where valuable stories are told as embedded within a form of expertise that women are most confident with. And this way, potentially offering more clues on how women exert influence on public and social life. So then the question is, how can we invite policymakers to the kitchen? And how do we, create those relationships of trust where that access is enabled, because that's not something that can be demanded, but it's something that has to be earned. I'm just going to stop here in the interest of time. And you'll also see on the screen our most recent publication from the Mountain Ecosystems Group, which I hope you can also access online. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Omer, for this really excellent presentation. I have to say that it's surprising, because even now, after more than 20 years in UNEP, one can learn to see things in a different way. And it was really an eye-opener on many aspects, but also what you said about environmental decline as a form of violence, where you can make easily the link between inclusion and participation versus discrimination and violence in gender debates, but also in social debates. So thanks a lot for this very valuable input and for respecting the time, by the way, and which gives us time to now go to our next speakers, which are Cristina dalla Torre, researcher at Eurac Research, and Alessandra Piccoli, also researcher at the Free University of Bolzano. And they are going to speak to us about the Alps as a laboratory to study ecofeminist perspectives, aka how a researcher encounters gender issues in her journey. So please, the floor is yours, for the two of you.
Thank you very much. I'm share my screen. Can you see it correctly? Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. So first of all, I want to introduce the theme by providing some definition. First of all, ecofeminism, that is a philosophical and political theory and movement which combines ecological concerns with feminist one, regarding both as resulting from male domination of society, namely patriarchy. Here, patriarchy is intended as a social paradigm based on hierarchy and the right of those sitting on the top of the social pyramid to control, dominate, and exploit those laying on the bottom. This refers to people, animals, land, and nature as a whole. Since the late 16th century, men have started to create a dichotomy between culture and nature, connecting culture to men and nature to women. And at the same time, they assume that culture is superior to nature as well as men are superior to women. A special representative of this kind of philosophical beliefs is Francis Bacon, but several others have followed him during the time. On this ground, patriarchal societies have developed a long series of crimes against women, indigenous people, First Nations, non-human beings, and Mother Earth. So ecofeminism eventually denies this superiority by affirming the equal belonging of men and women to nature and by asking for a reconnection. Assuming that concepts are starting point, we want to declare our position and our positionality as researcher and as activist. We practice transformative research that differs from usual neutral, aseptic social sciences approach by becoming supportive to social change. And I pass the floor to Cristina.
Thank you, Alessandra. So as a white, well-educated woman coming from a rich mountain province of Italy and living in different urban areas for a short time to study and work, I could notice from far away existing gender issues in rural mountain areas until I returned, working, living and researching there. And I directly banged my nose against gender issues. So in this presentation, I will guide you through my research journey. So I started researching on social innovation in rural alpine areas through the Horizon 2020 SIMRA project. Social innovations are defined as reconfiguring of networks, practices for addressing needs and contributing to the well-being of rural areas and involving civil society. With my colleague, we have investigated initiatives in the domain of care service provision through farming, as farming is a characterizing sector of rural mountain areas and care provision is an issue in remote mountain areas. And there we directly encountered gender issues as we were approaching a gender-relevant topic, that of care services, in a domain, farming, which is recognized having a gendered organization of tasks. Next slide, please. So we therefore investigated what are the impacts in terms of women empowerment of the provision of childcare services on the farm, and organized in a social cooperative. So we define empowerment as the process to acquire the ability to make strategic life choices. And we use the dimension of power to make decisions, power with, collectively organize and power within. So increase of self-esteem and to see oneself as a changing agent. Next slide, please. Our study region was South Tyrol. South Tyrol is a mountainous province in Italy that has a German-speaking population and where all farmers belong to the German recognized minority. Main agricultural products are dairy, apples, and wines, and the share of female farmer managers is below the national and European average, although you see on the cake graph that the familiar agricultural force is quite balanced among women and men. In this context, women farmers saw it as unquestionable to follow their traditional role in agriculture, to care for their own children, to do the housekeeping, and to stay at the farm if the husband had to work off farm. Their motivations to start the activity as childminder reflect the attempt to make the best of their situation and to acquire their own field of action with an economic outcome. Next slide, please. So from this study, it clearly emerges that women farmers have used their capabilities to cross the boundaries of agriculture and to start an entrepreneurial activity that meets social needs. In so doing, they have set the base for putting the framework of traditional patriarchal agriculture under discussion, and the provision of childcare services had positive impacts over women farmers, but with some limitations. First of all, women farmers were able to increase their negotiation skills, so the power to, in order to free up the time previously reserved for unpaid care. However, the provision of care services adds workload to women farmers, so they sustain the family through the fulfillment of multiple tasks. Secondly, the successful work of the social cooperative demonstrate the collective ability of the South Tyrolean farmers, women farmers, to gain power with. So power with was also gained through having access to networking and training digital means, together with physical social opportunities such as meeting, excursions, on-field training, enabled by the social cooperatives as a collective effort. Thirdly, there is room for discussion on the potential to acquire power within by taking over a typical female duty. So on the one side, women farmers commodify their reproductive role and their contribution to a domestic and community life, providing care services for the neighborhood, which helps them to legitimize their business activities. However, social services such as childcare, generally implemented by females, is a poorly paid activity. So we can conclude that the provision of farm-based childcare services only partly helped women farmers to break out from their typical roles on the farm, as it maintains actually their reproductive and domestic positions. Next slide, please. As a consequence, we reflected on the fact that gender issues are a consequence of the way economy is organized. I thus turned my research on studying collaborative economic models to manage resources. So community-based ways of managing lands and goods, which have been existing in mountain areas for centuries for coping with harsh condition and difficult productive conditions. However, in approaching this issue, since the beginning, I encountered gender issues on my journey. It emerged clearly that although very important for ecosystem stewardship, community-based natural resource management is a patriarchal domain, where the systemic exclusion of women in decision-making in commons is a characteristic. And that was one of the entry points, my entry points in the study. Therefore, my research relates to the emergence and the outcomes of innovations in collective resource governance to tackle current social and ecological challenges. Next slide, please. So the results of so far of the study, which became my PhD project and is still ongoing, is that socioeconomic changes in mountain areas determine a change in the needs for instance, for recreation, for small-scale food production, for social opportunities, for a thriving nature in mountain areas. And thus, it changes also the way the value of the nature and resources is perceived by the local community and the activities that are conducted on such spaces. And also this leads to the change in new stakeholders that are that are considered to be to have a stake in the way now resources are perceived. And this calls for new governance arrangements that are required to manage resources to cope with ongoing changes in terms of stakeholders that are involved and in terms of new uses and new values of the resource. So with these results confirm that what Maria Mies says, that there are no commons, so no community-based resource management without a community, but not a gated, isolated or excluding community, rather a community that's based on the principle of cooperation and of responsibility to each other and to the habitat and the nature. So this brings out the need for a feminist perspective on commons, as Federici pointed out in her research. Commons may be the collective sphere in which traditional gender roles are broken and a new relation between gender is created, and also one among humans and the ecosystem. And research on commons and commoning for rethinking economy. So research could be functional for rethinking economy in a more inclusive way. So commonizing production, reproduction, and care, which other forms like capitalistic form of economy have separated. And such research could be functional to overcome the state of irresponsibility of human production actions that result in destructive relations towards gender and nature. And with this, I return the word to Alessandra.
And then to arrive at some conclusions, we be considered as laboratory on
There's a sound topic, Alessandra. We cannot hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Better.
Okay, sorry. So now to conclude, we can propose that mountain areas can be considered laboratory on ecofeminism. Sorry. Okay. And in fact, ecofeminism asks for reconnecting humans and nature, overcoming the dichotomy between cultural and natural. In this sense, environmental sustainability and social sustainability are two sides of the same coin and cannot be divided. Striving for the climate, forgetting human rights makes no sense. We need to understand how much tied up is our life on Earth with all other beings, human and non-human. And in particular, to achieve this result, we can say that a specific and particular role is played by critical actor, women, inspired women and men able to embody a new pathway to into social practices. And in this sense, a very interesting experience and example is provided by food sovereignty movements like La Via Campesina, where they have already strongly connected their struggle for agroecological practices to gender justice. And to arrive at a conclusion, some policy suggestion, we can suggest to promote care-based economies as social infrastructure instead of physical or digital infrastructure. So stop great works and posthumanism, instead invest money in care and in the social infrastructure, support local movements for alternative development, growth, social justice, and women empowerment. So let's make space for the NIMBY logic of land care and advance educational initiative to facilitate a mindset change, permitting people to decolonize their imaginary. as researchers, we would like to suggest some research direction like diffusion and support the relevance of ecofeminism principles in climate, food, and environmental movement, especially in South Tyrol as regards our institutions, potential of gender inclusivity to support a green shift in mountain areas, and capacity of men to adapt to a different social paradigm of masculinity based on ecofeminism also in the alpine cultures. Please, Cristina, to conclude.
Yeah, and we thought that to pose also questions for reflection to the audience. So it's for the Alps to be a laboratory, we need to think around ourselves. What are the germinal experience of care that we could support? And if we know traditional activities in mountain areas that could be transformed through an ecofeminist approach, as we have seen through this presentation, and which policies and research and actions could be supportive of that. With that, we would like to thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, the team from South Tyrol, for your excellent presentation as well, and for, let's say, continuing the eye-opening journey or the eye-opening trip, taking us to the ecofeminism and really about empowerment, also the limits to empowerment, your thoughts about community-based resource management and how to overcome, and that was again for me a key moment, to overcome the state of irresponsibility and destructive relation towards gender and nature, and what you, I think, call to a man-woman-nature reconnection that you are stipulating for. So thank you very much for that. And we're going to come back with a question on the roundtable at the very end. We are almost there. We are running out of time. We need to shorten the program a little bit. We have one more, let's say, intervention foreseen where we wanted to play a video. Now we are going to only play a little trailer and quickly introduce the woman that stands behind it, who is not here personally today, but who sent some greetings and a video. It's about Ilina Arsova, a mountaineer and activist and artist from North Macedonia, and you said one of the 70 women who climbed the Mount Everest. She has initiated and has been delivering mountain guides training for 30 women from her country through the Federation of Mountain Sports with support of the UNDP. They have increased their percentage of women mountain guides from 40 to 40%. So far, women participation in this region job positions is drastically underrepresented, and also women are underrepresented in the high altitude mountaineering sports. For this reason, she has designed, hosted several programs such as This Is Her, a documentary video, a girls climbing school, art venture, educational activities for women and girls from cross-border regions, activities in the field of outdoor tourism in rural areas and mountain awareness, and so on. She has been performing globally, videos, a book called Strong Women, Better World, published by the Center for Sport, Peace and Society. She is sending us her appreciations, and we're going to watch a trailer, and the full video is going to be in the recording of this meeting.
We are girls, sisters, mothers, women. Just like Mother Nature, we give life and we find a purpose to live for. The nature is what leads us. The sports fulfill us. Being fulfilled personally is a step closer to make changes around you. Our stories write history in our communities of the action sports. We live the risky way of life, and we don't do it to impress you, but we do it because it's the only way we know. We do not choose our origin, when and where we were born. I was lucky enough to grow up in a family who taught me very important things in life, such as playing sports and love for the nature. When I joined the swimming club at the age of 12, my girlfriends were telling me, "Don't swim so much, your arms will grow bigger." Because of climbing, chasing challenges, and setting new goals on the mountains, I got to discover the entire world. Meet and climb with other girls with even bigger arms than mine. When I was a child, I was climbing up the rooftops of the buildings so that I can see the city better. Later, I started climbing up the mountaintops, I guess to see the world better. There are days when it is hard to keep yourself motivated, even though you're inspiring and motivating others. Blame no one. Just train harder. Train your body as well as your mind. The deep connection with the nature is feeding my vision as an artist. One moment I realized that my bare body and soul, immersed with the nature, are part of the artwork. The performance zero is a highlight of this long-term relation between the art and the mountains. For painting, I prefer to be on cooler place, surrounded with a landscape where steep mountains are breaking the horizon. The way to the summit is not only long, but also steep, icy, and risky. Every step counts. The decisions you make are crucial, and there is no time for regrets. Your mind must be fully clean and focused. You're tired, lonely, and in pain, and still feeling blessed and extremely happy. All those peaks, including Everest as a first woman from Macedonia, showed that no goal is unreachable. And no dream is impossible. Your dream is what drives you further. Among feelings of happiness, love, and freedom.
Thank you very much. I hope this teaser is gonna make you feel like watching the full video about this, this again very unique and different story of this amazing person. Now let's come to our round table. We really don't have a lot of time left, so I will ask our panelists please to be very short and concise in your replies. And there will be one question to each of you. And we will again start with Sara Manuelli. And dear Sara, I wanted to ask you, please. It is clear that there is a need for better community support and of creation of spaces for women participation, groups, networks, organizations. There is a Mountain Women of the World network. How can a mountain woman join a network and which benefits can she get from it? How can...
Thank you, Harald. Well, the Mountain Women of the World Network, with whom we've created that publication I mentioned, that was actually created at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, interestingly. And it's a lot of women-led climbing associations from around the world. I'm already members of the Mountain Partnership, and they decided to form a community that could really foster women empowerment, community-based tourism training, innovative sustainable solutions. As I mentioned before, a lot of training for climbers, for example, in Latin America with the Cholitas. But the main goal is really to bring women together, to learn from each other, share experiences and tools. Everybody can join. At the moment, it is a closed network in the sense that it's made up from an organization of 8 countries, but I can give you the emails, and so you can get in contact directly with the coordinators. And it's also interesting that the fact that they're also very active. For example, they just got fundraised and they just completed an expedition and a summit of the Mount Aconcagua, if I say it right, in Argentina, with an expedition with women participating in 14 countries. And the group, the actual expedition, received a recognition from the Ministry of Culture and Tourism. So I invite everybody who's interested to visit the network website, to send an email. I'll put it in the chat. And if you want to also contact me, I can also forward your interest. Thank you. I'm going to put it in the chat now.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Sara. Please stay with us, those who still have a bit of time. And I have one question for Magdalena. From your experience in Poland, are there initiatives and funds specifically targeting and supporting women working on tourism and women working on tourism in mountains? How is the situation in the Polish Carpathians?
In Poland, and I'm sure in every European country also within the range of the Carpathian, the European funds play an important role on the national and regional level. That funds and initiatives that are divided into different financial institutions on the national, regional, and local level, supporting women directly and indirectly. So it's very important to mention about not only the direct way of funds and financial helps, as well as initiatives devoted to training, counseling, teaching how to run a business or start to run a business, but also indirect help, which creates the and supports the environment of those areas which are not supported by state in terms of, for example, places or where children can stay, so kindergartens and social help. But in particular, in the Polish part of the Carpathian Mountains, the most important role in terms of initiatives and knowing the needs of women who work in the mountainous areas plays those local initiatives on the lowest level, when women gather together and cooperate and help each other. During my research, I was honored to interview women who are associated within so-called in Poland farmers' wives associations. In Poland, it means that that's initiative. It's like a social professional associations of farmers, some kind of agricultural cooperatives, but mostly these are small town female initiatives, formal, informal, registered, spontaneous, informal social activities who are helping each other in terms of help in daily life as well as economic activities. And also, what is very important, the activities devoted mostly to social cooperatives, insurance cooperatives, like development foundations, social enterprises, local activity groups, which are present in the mountainous villages in the Carpathians. Those are initiatives who are trying to possess the funds and spread it, help women to participate on the market in terms of their own businesses, which are very connected to tourism in a very broad sense.
Thank you very much, Magdalena. Now to Theresia Oedl-Wieser. Please, as evidenced by today's meeting, transnational exchange of experience is an important aspect. Was there any follow-up to the meeting in June in the Lessach-Tal? And what was the added value in a sustainable way, please?
Yes, I think that both sides, the Georgian local action groups, Apasvanetsi, but also we as organizers and the people in Lessach-Tal could gain insights in each other's development issues and ways of doing in the region. So we had also exchange, cultural exchange during the meeting, and many possibilities to share experiences. What I think was very important to show the Georgian colleagues how to deal with the social capital in the region, how to develop it or to build on, to strengthen, to build trust, and also to bonding and bridging with inside the region, but also outside the region. And I think it was very important that we also invited people from institutions and intermediary organizations, so they could see how the regional governance is working in this region, and maybe they get some ideas how to start or bringing forward their LAC work in the region. So I think that it is really important to make these exchanges for both sides, and it is bringing people forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Theresia. Now we have heard from both of you about informal social activities, about cooperatives, about social capital and exchange. And now I wanted to ask Omer, on the policy side, how can policymakers more effectively engage with women to listen to their voices so that their needs can be translated more effectively into policymaking and change?
Thanks. I think 2 points from my end. First thing I would say is that the onus of listening is on us. It's on the researcher, the practitioner, the policymaker. Women and girls are typically the most busiest members of the household and the community. So how do we engage respectfully with existing avenues of listening instead of creating more burden for women? And this might require us to change our expectations around what constitutes good evidence or good engagement. So I think, policymakers, need to learn how to build, reciprocal relations of trust with communities, gain an invitation to the kitchen or the vegetable garden and so on. And that's not something, that can be demanded. It has to be earned. And also learn how to immerse in story, how to listen in ways without, preconceived notions of what is actionable data or what is evidence. And secondly, as an ethnographer, I love working with detail and story and the finer textures of life. But when I take this stuff to policymakers, there's always this question of translation. Policymakers often say, so now what should we do with all of this stuff, right? But that is the work, who does the work of translation? Where should that happen? Should that happen within community? Should that happen in the offices of our organizations? I don't think we've quite figured that piece out yet. And I think policymakers will benefit by diversifying the kinds of experts they work with, learning to work closely with ethnographers, anthropologists, sociologists, and not dismissing knowledge that is not so easily mappable or translatable into policy actions. I think a lot more emphasis is needed on the work of translation itself. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Omer. And of course, also change needs to be ready for change, and this might also, or does also imply to let certain things go, which leads me to my last question of today, to Cristina and Alessandra. And I wanted to ask you, what are, in your view, the most important factors that allow in traditional mountain communities to question existing traditional beliefs and social roles and support women economic development?
First, very shortly, I suggest to focus on critical actors. So those people embedded in the community, but able to envision a change in the culture or in the practice, everyday practice and community organization, so that they can offer way to enter in the the field, the community, and to start working with the other people. Cristina, would you like to add something?
Yeah, from my side, to integrate what Alessandra said, in support of such actors, what emerged from the studies is that policies that break the silos among sectors, so that break the silos among agriculture, natural resource management, and care activities or other activities, help to reconnect production, reproduction with care that has been so far divided and that has created this exclusion and disempowering conditions. At the same time, from the presentation of these two studies, we have seen that while social agriculture helps bridging the gender gap, but on private, on more the domestic and private aspects, commons or community-based management of resources could be the public community-based arena on which this bridging the gap action could really take a step further. And yeah, that's from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's leave it here. The last word should be yours. I want to thank all of you and the organizers, and also for all the participants out there to stay on even a little bit longer than initially expected. Let's hope again that this is, well, let's see it. Let's make that this is not a beginning or an end point, but this is an intermediate point, that it will continue from here. And I wish you all in this sense a meaningful International Women's Day tomorrow. Thank you very much for the session. It was a good session for me as well, and I hope for you as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.